The views expressed are solely those of the speaker and not necessarily those of Paltalk.com, AVM software, or its advertisers.
News Talk is online. News Talk Online is a production of Paltalk.com, the largest multimedia interactive program on the internet, with more than 4 million unique users on demand on iTunes and on YouTube, and on my blog, GaryBaumgarten.com, where you are all welcome to place your own comments, whether you agree with the author or not. And thanks to our friends at CRN Digital Talk Radio, where we're syndicated coast to coast across the United States into 12 million additional households. I am your host, Gary Baumgarten. Last week, you will recall that Oliver North was our guest here on News Talk Online on Paltalk.com because he was the scheduled keynote speaker at the weekend annual dinner of the Fallen and Wounded Soldiers Fund here in Livonia, Michigan, where I am joining you from where I am joining you now. I was able to come in on Saturday to catch that speech and to talk for a couple of moments with Ollie North, and it was kind of interesting because he bit the hand that feeds him, because he is now, of course, no longer a colonel in the United States Marine Corps. He is now a reporter for the Fox News Channel, and boy, oh boy, did he blast the mainstream media, which Fox, of course, is a part of that mainstream media. You can read a little bit about his comments on my blog, GaryBaumgarten.com, and you can also link from that article to the Fallen and Wounded Soldiers Fund for an opportunity to make donations to a very worthy cause, whether you are in favor of or opposed to the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. It matters not. Those of us here in the United States honor our brave men and women who answer the call to duty, and unfortunately the government sometimes has trouble catching up with the families of those who died to bring them benefits, or to our returning members of the service who are wounded to give them the help that they need, whether it's physical wounds or mental wounds. And this is where the Fallen and Wounded Soldiers Fund steps in. And actually, it was very heartening to see at that dinner on Saturday night at the Laurel Manor in Livonia, Michigan, some of the people who they assisted. There was one fella, when he returned from Iraq after his vehicle was blown up by an improvised device, a improvised landmine that they put out there, the insurgents do. He was paralyzed from the nipples down, and they assisted this young man. He's from Michigan, from western Michigan, and they invited him to be part of the dinner here at the Laurel Manor on Saturday. So in anticipation of him coming up on stage and being introduced, they built a ramp. Well, you should have seen there was not a dry eye in the place, because he told the gentleman who was his liaison, the go-between between the Fallen and Wounded Soldiers Fund and him and his family, he said to that gentleman, "I will not be coming to the dinner in a wheelchair." He said, "I will walk. I will walk by April." And guess what? He did. With the aid of a cane, he was able to make it up the steps on his own. Doctors said he would never walk again, and yet he walked. And it just shows the determination of many of these young men and women who answer the call to duty. So I encourage you to go to the site, GaryBaumgarten.com, look at the Ollie North interview, and then click on the link to the Fallen and Wounded Soldiers Fund to make a donation. Okay, that aside, I am so happy to welcome back to the show Francis Moore Lappe. You know her as the author, I think way back in the 70s, of the best-selling book Diet for a Small Planet, in which she spoke of the world food shortage and the impending crisis. Perhaps that fell a little bit on deaf ears. I don't know. She's written many other award-winning and best-selling books in subsequent years, but we remember that book, her first bestseller, the most, I think. And I thought it was apropos Francis Moore Lappe, to welcome you back to News Talk Online to talk about the food riots that are going on around the world and the crisis that the head of the World Bank has suggested is a food tsunami. Francis Moore Lappe, welcome to News Talk Online on Paltalk.com.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be with you. I heard you say, thanks, my first book talked about food shortage. Actually, Diet for a Small Planet, way back when, 1971, what woke me up as a 20-something is the realization that there was no food shortage, that there's plenty of food in the world, and that's still true today. So I think that the first thing I want to go out of the gate with is simply that we have not collided with nature's limits, and that is not the problem today. Even though, even the New York Times, I believe it was the day before yesterday, Paul Krugman, or very recently the columnist for the New York Times, said, "Oh, this represents the limit of a finite planet, and we've hit it," and I disagree.
Well, let's look at that situation. We have farmers here in the United States of America who are actually paid to not grow crops. What is the thought process behind what seems at a time when people are starving around the world for it appears to be such an absurd policy?
Well, today what's really going on is that farmers are encouraged by subsidies. Our tax dollars are encouraged to not only plant what they used to, but plant more of one crop, that is corn, that's taking the place now of part of our soy crop. And now it's predicted that 1/3 of our corn crop is going to biofuels. I like to call it agrofuel, to remind us that this is really using food-producing land to feed cars. And I calculated that the amount of corn going to fill the tank of what is called the Green Hummer, a GM Hummer, 23-gallon tank. You use enough corn that a person could have enough calories to eat for an entire year on the corn that goes into producing that one tank. And the water that goes into producing the corn to produce that tank of ethanol, that one could bathe for several years on the amount of water used. So this is a wildly inefficient and destructive approach. And so we're at the level here of symptoms of a deep, deep problem.
Not to mention the fact that it takes a lot of energy to produce ethanol and other biofuels.
Right, and so the scientists, I've looked at various reports on is there any net gain, and if there is any net gain in terms of the environmental impact, it is very, very modest, and certainly when you calculate in the cost to human beings and when you calculate in the increasing pressure on the soil, this